Welcome to Vernacular Verbose, Jethro Tull podcast. My name's Joey Vetter.
My name's Eugene Manko.
And today we're taking a look at the album A, released in 1980. If you're a fan of the podcast and are feeling generous, you can now support us on Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/vernacularverbose. Any donations will go right back into producing the podcast by helping us cover our editing costs. Again, that's ko-fi.com/vernacularverbose. So we've made it all the way through the 70s, and now we make it to A, the opening of 80s Tull. So 80s Tull is a really interesting era for the band. It's kind of, it's many different things to many different people, is kind of the way that I would put 80s Tull. And there's a lot of different sentiment and feeling about 80s Tull. There's some people who really like it quite a lot. There's, I think, a sizable number of people who actually quite hate it, and they don't really bother with it at all. And then there's some people for whom it's just kind of in the middle. So before we move on to talking about A, the album, I want to just kind of reflect a bit on 80s Tull. I'd be interested to hear what you think, Eugene, but that's kind of my take on 80s Tull, is that there's a very wide range of feeling about it in the Tull fan community. What do you think?
Yeah, there definitely is. And, well, there is a wide range of feeling about 80s Tull in my head, as it were, because there are albums I won't be coy about it. There is an album that I really like, and there are other albums I don't care much about. So for me, in the Tull 80s catalog, there's one record that really stands out, and it's not A. But overall, well, Tull have always been a progressive band. And they always wanted to experiment, and that's what they did. And the success of that can vary, or it may connect with us or may not connect with us, but it's definitely not out of character for them to discover new things and try to go with them and see how they fit with their music.
Yeah. There's several different things that kind of characterize this era of the band, a lot of different things that are happening at once. The main one in the forefront, of course, that I think is most obvious to most people is the experimentation with electronic music and synthesizers, which that, very much characterizes the first half of the decade very much. Not so much the second half, but a little bit. The second is kind of the deterioration of Ian's voice, which kind of happens throughout the decade, and especially by the end of the decade kind of leaves him in a position where he's totally different, sounding very different from how he ever did before. And then also kind of the period, creating a period of the band that had more of a revolving door of a lineup, as opposed to more of a settled band. And it's not that Tull have ever really been a settled band. At this point in their history, lineup changes were still something they were used to. But I think I've seen the argument put forth, and I kind of agree with it, that by 1980, Tull was very much becoming even more of an Ian-centric band, and that the rest of the band, the responsibility and kind of the importance of the rest of the band was kind of falling to the wayside. Not that there weren't important members in the band still at this point, but that it was becoming much more of an Ian-centric band with sort of support musicians.
Probably. Well, you can look at it like that, but you can also talk about the importance of people like Peter John Vettese.
Yeah, totally.
Who really shaped the sound, and it's not really fair to talk about albums with his contribution as purely Ian-centric, because Walk Into Light was Ian plus Peter John Vettese as much as such as Divinities were Ian plus Andrew Giddings.
Yeah. Yeah, Peter Vettese is someone who I'm interested to talk a lot more about in the next couple episodes, because I totally agree with you that when you look at the history of Tull, he's someone who is really underrated in terms of the like you said, the shape that he had and the impact he had on the band was really significant on the records that he was with the band for. There's a book that came out not too long ago, I think just a couple years ago. It's called Original Jethro Tull, The Glory Years by Gary Parker. And he kind of puts forth an argument in this book that Tull kind of ceased being a band in 1980, and that so 1968 to 1980 was kind of the era of Jethro Tull, the band, and that after that it sort of became something else. And I think there's something to be said for in there.
Well, could be, yes. You could look at it. There wasn't a group effort, rather than it started becoming Ian plus other musicians, like a collaboration of Ian with musicians that were, some of them more important, some of them less important.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be able to single out individual contributions and individual voices, but maybe the communal effort did diminish at that point.
Yeah. And that's a good segue into talking about this album particularly, because as I think a lot of Tull fans know, the A album was not created with the intention of being a Jethro Tull album.
Mm-hmm.
It was, of course, intended to be an Ian Anderson album, hence the name A for Anderson. And that's one of those things that makes this album really strange to talk about, I think, and kind of uncomfortable to talk about. Because it's not, it would be one thing if the album started production as an Ian solo album and then it kind of morphed into something else as they were recording it. But that's not even what happened here. What happened was this was started and finished entirely with the intention of being an Ian Anderson solo album, and at the last minute, because of label pressure, it was changed into a Jethro Tull album. So that makes it a really strange album in the discography, and it makes it kind of difficult a little bit to talk about in that regard, I think.
Yeah. Well, the people who listen to our podcast, who have been around at that time and have experienced that story themselves, would be probably more familiar with that. But I wonder how it felt at the time to people. And of course, there wasn't internet around that time, and it wasn't as closely examined by the public. But it sort of feels also familiar these days, because kind of a similar thing happened to Jethro Tull recently, which used to be an Ian Anderson solo project and then became Jethro Tull.
Yeah.
And the story we hear about Terry Ellis just announcing that A was to be the next Jethro Tull album. Well, it could have been a story. It could have been something that they decided ultimately to tell.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist. That period is already, historical.
Yeah.
And all we have is the accounts of people who were around at the time.
Mm-hmm. I know that Ian has said several times that he regrets, in retrospect, allowing this album to be released as a Tull album, and that he wishes that he kind of put his foot down and insisted it be an Ian Anderson album. Kind of the one response I would have if I was kind of speaking to Ian about this, I would just say that it really shouldn't be any surprise that the record label or anybody else really would perceive it as anything other than a Jethro Tull album, when you have essentially 3/5 of Jethro Tull at the time on the album.
Yeah.
And Ian has told the story about how when it came time to get a guitarist for the album, he said that he didn't know any guitarists besides Marten Barre, which I think is a very strange statement for someone whose life for the past 12 years has been a professional musician to say. I think what he meant more so was Marten Barre was the only guitarist who he had a working relationship with and who he trusted. And I know that Marten has said in interviews that he was hesitant to play on this album, and that he told Ian, you should try somebody else. Maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't like it, but you should at least give it a try. But Ian insisted that he wanted Marten on it, and so that's one of those things where when you have the two longest serving members of Jethro Tull on this album, not just on one or two tracks, but on the entire album, I think it's no surprise that the label would look at it and say, well, this is a Jethro Tull album.
Yeah, for sure. How do you think, in general, the album was perceived by the public? It has a very, very different image, right? It has a very different sound, a very different cover, a very different name. We know that the name A was selected because the tapes, the cans were labeled A for Anderson, as far as we know, but it's very open to interpretation, right? What that could mean. I also wonder if the European public, the European listeners, just call this album A.
Yeah.
Because that's, of course, what this letter is in most languages except English.
Yeah, I think when you look at the cover art, especially, they're deliberately playing with kind of the ambiguity of A, where they literally have A presented as like this mysterious, like otherworldly thing in the sky, which the cover art for this album is hilarious to me. By the way, I don't know what you think about it. And
I think it's pretty funny.
I don't know if it was deliberately like if they intended for it to be funny or if it just kind of came out that way. But it's just really funny to me how it's like, the band does one electronic album and all of a sudden they're like in the Starship Enterprise or something on Star Trek.
Yeah, well, I think to me, it's my internal interpretation. It's not by any means something they would intend, but this cover to me is band transfixed by new technology.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is.
Yeah. The fact that it does look kind of funny and it may be a little tongue-in-cheek, I noticed that there exist interpretations of songs on this album, and maybe of this album as a whole, but wouldn't be sure about that. That there is a lot of satire, and to me, maybe as not a British person, maybe as a non-native English speaker, the satire doesn't really come across readily. But I think when listening to Stuart Wood talk about some of the songs in this album, at least two of them mentioned that he perceived them as satirical, and it was a surprise to me. And I looked again at these songs and thought, yeah, maybe that could have been the possible intent. But with the overall sound and the mood of the album, which to me feels kind of nervous and angular and a little anxious, the satire that I'm used to hearing in Tull music doesn't really connect with that sound. So for a very long time, I thought this entire album was written kind of in earnest. Well, maybe there are obviously things like batteries not included, things like the four-wheel drive, which aren't totally in earnest. But maybe there was an element of intended satire that doesn't come across because of the sonic choices. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can't say that a lot of it comes across as obvious satire to me, but there totally could be things I'm missing. I think the thing I'm curious about is if the cover art is intended to be satire, because it kind of, like I said, it kind of comes across that way, although I don't know if it's intentional. I think, you mentioned kind of how fans would have reacted to this at the time. And I was thinking about that a bit as well, because looking back on this album, it's colored, of course, by what came before and after it.
Yeah.
More so after that. Of course, the fans at the time didn't have the, knowledge of what would come later. I think at the time, the cover art would actually make more sense in that regard, just because at the time, this was the one electronic Jethro Tull album. And so, it makes sense for them to really lean more into that, style, I guess, with the cover and things like that. But of course, with retrospect now, we know that there wasn't just one electronic Jethro Tull album. That this kind of started a little period of electronic Tull, and so
a trilogy, if you will.
Yeah, I actually, somebody in our comment section, I'm sorry I forgot your name, called this the Synth Trilogy, which that was the first time I had ever heard anybody mention that. I really can't say that I view those three albums as a trilogy or really connected much at all, because I think there's a lot of differences between them, but it's kind of interesting to think about.
I had a thought too as well yesterday that people like talking about the folk trilogy with the albums being quite different actually between them, but why don't we talk about the synth trilogy? I'm sorry.
But I think if you were a fan of Tull in 1980 when this came out, I think it would stand out a lot more, just because it was much more novel and you didn't know that whether there was going to be more electronic Tull or more music like this from the band.
I think I read somewhere that fans weren't really crazy about it, and I don't have the benefit of looking at the booklet, where you would probably have the booklet for the Steven Wilson reissue remix, where you would have probably some of the critical responses, the acclaim of the critics or disapproval. But I wonder how much this album, similarly to War Child after A Passion Play, which was decimated by the critics, I think there was critical backlash after Stormwatch. I think I read about that Stormwatch was said to be old-fashioned, out of date, that it didn't sound like the spirit of the times. And very specifically, I think one of the critics called out the fact that there were very few synthesizers. Where's all the electronic music that was in vogue? And I wonder how much of that Ian did take to heart and introduce electronic drums and synthesizers and all that stuff into the Jethro Tull sound.
Yeah, I have the book here with me, and it kind of mentions how the reviews were fairly mixed, like negative to mixed critical opinions, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I remember reading also that this album didn't do that well commercially, which doesn't really surprise me. In that retrospect, I think, it wasn't looked on as a great period for Tull. But I mean, I know Tull had a lot of kind of, I don't know, commercial issues in the 80s, I suppose. Kind of the only bright spot for them was Broadsword, which actually sold pretty well in most of Europe, as far as I know. But yeah, I think, in retrospect, I don't think it's surprising that this album didn't do that well, because it had somewhat of an identity crisis to begin with. Plus, regardless of the solo album thing, I mean, it came right after there was a huge lineup split in the band, which probably wasn't beneficial for their image much.
Yeah, that could have been the reason.
So speaking of the member lineup, so there's of course a lot to mention on this one. You have Ian Anderson on vocals, flute, acoustic guitar, Marten Barr on electric guitar, Dave Pegg on bass guitar, Mark Craney on drums, and Eddie Jobson on keyboards. So the three, new ones to talk about here. Dave Pegg, who I think most people know, but was the replacement for John Glasscock on the Stormwatch tour, who then, of course, became the permanent Tull bass player for a long time, over 10, 15 years. Eddie Jobson, who I'm not super familiar with Eddie Jobson, but I know that he's a really big name in, modern British music, and his main band, UK, that he was working with for a long time. I think even at the time in 1980, it was a big deal that Eddie Jobson was playing with Tull and Ian Anderson, and it was such a big deal to the point where he sort of insisted on being billed as a special guest and not necessarily, an official member of the band. And then Mark Craney, who I don't know a lot about. I don't really think he had that much of a career outside of doing Tull and some other things. But he's a pretty interesting drummer when you look at it. I think he's someone who I overlooked a bit, I suppose. I think when you look at his drum parts on this album, they're actually not that far off from what I think someone like Barry Barlow would have played on this album. Not that that's exactly the same. And I don't know, I'm not familiar enough with his playing to know if that was a conscious decision to try to keep it more in the Tull wheelhouse. Although,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, he wouldn't have known at the time that this was going to be a Tull album anyway. But Mark Craney and Eddie Jobson, of course, this was the only thing they ever did with Tull, so it creates kind of a unique one-off band for this album.
Yeah, I wonder, the drum parts on A sound simpler than a regular Barry Barlow drum part, but of course one has to wonder whether Barry would have played a simpler part on an album that sounded like this.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. The thing with Mark, he had a lot of the progressive sensibilities, which a drummer like Barry had, but there definitely was more of a focus on, just the rhythm and the beat, which is what I suppose a more traditional drummer would have done. But especially when I listened to the live CD that was included on the A remix, I was impressed with his playing on some of the older songs like Heavy Horses and things like that. I was impressed with how much he was able to keep up with the original parts. Which it's worth mentioning, at the time we're recording this in 2021, just in case there's any future Tull fans who are digging back through this ancient podcast, this is the last Steve Wilson remix that was released as the time we're talking about this. And the next one is supposed to be Broadsword. I guess that's coming next year. So this is kind of where it ends for us in terms of the Steve Wilson mixes. I can't say that, for one thing, I'm not familiar enough with this album anyway to really notice a lot of major changes in the remix beyond just, sonic stuff, but...
Well, I did find one change.
Oh, really?
It is kind of sonic. It's to do with an effect, but I noticed it. Overall, I think... Apart from a couple of places, I really like what Steven Wilson did with the remix. I think he really dried down the drums, made them much less 80s. And even though they still, sound like 80s drums, but it's not obnoxious anymore, if you will.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that, I mean, they're going to do Broadsword, which I'm really looking forward to, and I really hope they continue on to do Under Wraps, just because those are two albums that I think could really, really benefit from a modern day remix, the two of those especially.
Yeah, that's true. I compared A with Broadsword, the remix with the non-remix, with just the 2004 version, and I was struck by how dated the drums on Broadsword sounded.
Yeah.
And then I switched back to the non-remixed A and heard the same thing.
Yeah, I really hope they can get to it.
Mm-hmm.
So one last thing I'll mention on kind of the differences between this album and Tull that came before it. When you look at it lyrically, this is kind of the first, I guess, wholesale abandonment of kind of like the traditional Tull fantasy, and going much more for, you know, very clear contemporary modern day issues, current events, that kind of thing. A lot of it inspired by Cold War tensions. That was a topic that would become fairly standard for Tull in the next couple of years. I mean, I guess Broadsword is kind of an exception, but this is kind of the first we see of a lot of the Cold War modern lyric stuff really coming out into full focus.
Yeah, well, the modern lyrics have been around in the previous album. Some of the songs, at least one of the songs on this album, was recorded as first recorded as early as Songs from the Wood.
Yeah,
and they put it off because they clearly felt that this didn't fit. But they did have songs about politicians and about the modern life before, like songs like Strip Cartoon.
Yeah.
But yeah, the focus, the full-on review of modern anxieties and fears like that, this was unheard of previously.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I even look back to, you know, Stand Up and Benefit and stuff, which still had kind of modern, you know, lyrics. But to me, something about them, it may just be kind of looking at them in retrospect, but those kinds of lyrics, they still felt fanciful, sort of, to me, and presented in a nicely wrapped kind of story bow.
Yeah.
Well, the lyrics here are very much, you know, they're clearly about current events, things that are in the news right now, which feels different.
Yeah, it's a thing. I do believe that Ian started putting the realities of the life of the world that surrounds him more and more into his lyrics.
Yeah,
like writing about what he sees, to the point of the most recent songs, you know, having lines like "Facebook frenzied social network."
Yeah. Track 1, Crossfire. Right off the bat, this is kind of this is an interesting one to begin with. It's very funky. It's and probably to this point the funkiest Tull song that we've heard in the discography. And it almost, maybe this sounds kind of weird, but it almost reminds me of like a modern Jamiroquai song or something. Something about it kind of has that swagger to it.
Well, yeah, it does have kind of a disco beat.
Yeah.
Something that would have been called disco at the time, I think. Not even funky, but, you know, the sort of a straight boom, kang, like, you know, Another One Bites the Dust.
Yeah. Very jazzy keyboards from Eddie Jobson. This may be something I mentioned a couple times, but he has a very distinctive piano tone, if you know what I mean. That it's kind of all over this album.
Oh, yeah. Electronic piano tone, but definitely.
Yeah.
It's interesting how, well, we've just talked about the focus on the modern life, on the world around, that really fully begins on this album. And I think this first song is a statement to that effect, because it is written about the siege of the Iranian embassy that happened a few months before this album was released. So this was a very fresh song, a song about events that were on everyone's mind.
Yeah, Ian actually mentions in the book that it was happening literally as they were in the studio, and it was on the TV, which is why it influenced the writing. Yeah,
it would have been. Yeah, so it's written from the point of view of a policeman who's stuck with the terrorists in the building, kept hostage and waiting for people to rescue him. I read about that event. I'm sure some of our listeners would have followed it on the news at the time, but it went on for a few days, and people weren't really sure what was going to happen. and what Margaret Thatcher would decide to do on the special forces. It escapes me at the moment. Finally swooped in on day 6 of the siege. I can't imagine how terrified everyone must have felt then.
Yeah, so that's a great example of how, it's not just a modern day event, a current event. It's literally a current event in that it's happening, as they were recording. And I kind of wonder if, those kinds of lyrics, if they started because, to Ian this was a solo album, and so he didn't really feel confined by traditionally Tull things.
Must have been.
Because I think when you look at Broadsword, which obviously Broadsword is like through and through a Tull album, I think. And there's a lot of differences, I think, in presentation and lyrical content and things. So there's some things they share, but in general, it feels like there was Broadsword compared to this album is much more of a clear attempt at a Tull album.
Yeah, of course, and I'm sure that Ian started to write songs differently because he thought he was doing a solo album. But there are similarities. Broadsword is presented like a fantasy thing, but it has modern day songs like "Fallen on Hard Times."
Yeah, that's the one that comes to mind the most.
Yeah, it's the obvious one, and I think Pussy Willow is one as well. And even, Flying Colors is not a current event song, but it's very, applicable. Kind of timeless.
Yeah, so I wonder if, he started doing that because he assumed this would be a solo album and then just kind of carried over.
Probably. Well, we know that Workin' John, Workin' Joe was an older song at the time. So it must have, it clearly didn't happen overnight. It must have been something that was on his mind, and he leaned into it.
The chorus of this song actually reminds me of Something's on the Move a little bit. It kind of has that same sound to me.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's not like the same music. It's not the same melody, but it does have a very similar feel. I don't have a lot of musical notes about this song in particular, just because the lyrical content and the concept of it kind of overshadows what has been done in it, I think, musically.
Yeah, I think I would actually name this one as among the highlights of this album. As we go along, I'm sorry to say for anyone who likes this album that my opinion on it is not very positive. I think
is mine.
You probably share the same. It's interesting. One of the things that these remixes have kind of allowed for, which is kind of cool, is that as each one comes out, the people who love that album can kind of come out of the woodwork to defend it, when it happens. So I actually saw a decent amount of people who were really supportive of this album when the remix came out, which is cool to me, because this isn't an album I think of when I think of, a popular Tull album, so...
Yeah, no, it's the coolest thing, and every album needs people to defend it. And it's wonderful that that there is a small fan base for every album, not just for Jethro Tull, just overall.
But this is one that I would highlight as kind of a standout to me on this album.
Yeah, it's a good track, and it's a good beginning of the album. It's a very strong start, although. I don't know, maybe it's my memories of it when I first listened to it. Maybe it's the story in it that feels to me like something very tense. But whenever I play this track, I feel that it's slower than it ought to be. Like I'm expecting a faster pace every time.
That's interesting.
But yeah, it's a very good start. It's like sometimes Jethro Tull will have a moderately ingenious track at the beginning of the album that's not the true highlight, but that is a very strong beginning.
Yeah, it's a good description.
They don't put their best effort up front, but they put something strong enough to grab people. Track 2, Fylingdale Flyer. I'm going to talk about the time signature straight away, because this is probably the most progressive track on the entire album. It's incredibly complex in terms of rhythm. And the intro is, I don't imagine anyone but a musician who had learned to play this song specifically can really follow with what is happening with the rhythm in the very beginning, because it doesn't have a melody to support it. It's just stabs that occur at what feels like completely random intervals, and we are only getting the key to what is happening there in the middle of the song, where these same stabs are superimposed with the melody, with the da-da-ta-tum, da-da-ta-tum, the leitmotif. And only then we can understand what was actually happening in the intro, which is very cool and a very progressive concept. And I can and will want to explain what is actually going on in there, in this little melody. I have a keyboard with me today, and I'm not afraid to use it. I will be demonstrating several things about several tracks, I think, because why I want to do this specifically on this album is because I have a lot of questions about it. Is because with some of the songs, I'm not sure what Tull were trying to do, because on the previous albums, the ones we and a lot of people love the most, it feels like everything they did was done very successfully. It didn't question their intention, so it didn't kind of prompt me to whip up a keyboard and examine what's actually going on. But here I wanted to see for myself what was it they were trying to do, because maybe with some of the songs I'm not too convinced about what they were trying to do. Fylingdale Flyer is, I think, one of my favorite tracks on this album, so I'm not questioning its effectiveness, but this is just a place where I wanted to figure out what was going on with the rhythm. And there are, I think, two complex rhythmic ideas in this track. The first complex rhythmic idea is the verse, which you could, the easiest way to look at it is to look at it as just plain 4/4, but with occasional bars of this 4/4 cut short, which is a thing that Tull like to do. But they are cut short differently, and they're cut short, some of them are cut short by a quarter note, so it's just a bar of 3, and some of them are cut short by an 8th note, which makes it a little bar of 7/8 instead of a full 4/4. So there are missing beats, but the missing beats are different length, and that is what's happening in the verse. This is why it kind of feels off kilter, why it always feels the beats feel unexpected. But in the melody, which is the leitmotif, there is a different rhythmic idea, and that rhythmic idea is we have two phrases the melody consists of. The melodies, the phrases are similar, but they are not the same, and the phrases are... Oh no, this is the wrong sound. We're in the 80s. We can't have the Wurlitzer sound anymore. Yeah, that's better. So the first phrase is this. And the second phrase is... So the last two notes have been added to the second phrase, which makes one phrase 6 beats and the other phrase 7 beats. And the 6-beat phrase and the 7-beat phrase alternate between themselves, creating a kind of 13-beat pattern, which again contributes to how unexpected the rhythm feels in this song. So, and all of these rhythmic complexities, they contribute to the overall feel of this track, where a rhythm that's difficult to predict serves as metaphor for the unpredictability and tension in the story that it tells. And speaking of the story, what do you think of the lyrics in this one?
Yeah, so the very first thing that I'll mention on this track is just the Mandela effect, which maybe a lot of people listening have experienced, where for years I thought this song was Fylingdale Flyer, but no, it's Fylingdale, because that's the name of an Air Force base in the UK.
Yeah.
I think that I found out it was Fylingdale at some point, but then I forgot again, and so I discovered for the second time that I was wrong. So that's always been kind of funny to me about this one. But I totally agree with you that this is one of the only standouts on the album, and this is kind of one of the only songs that I would sort of, listen to on my own time outside of the album. Lyrically, so it's based on this Cold War thing of kind of a story inspired by a true story. I don't really know the details of the true story, but apparently some American watch station had a malfunction on their system that watched for nuclear missiles from Russia, and it believed that there was an actual incoming nuclear missile, but that some superior in the American office sort of made the call not to retaliate because it did end up, not being real. Hopefully I haven't gotten any of that history wrong. Someone can correct me. But that's what this song is about, is it's kind of based on that scenario of not knowing whether what you're seeing is a real impending attack or not.
I was a little bit surprised when kind of reading back the lyrics and looking at them, that the song kind of felt that there wasn't any jeopardy in it. Like, it wasn't a story where we're expecting a missile and we don't know what it is, but rather than that, it's we're seeing something on the radars and we don't believe it's real.
Yeah.
And I think one of the interpretations is that it is kind of satirical, and I think I noticed that when Stuart Wood talked about this on his YouTube channel. He said that this was a song about the psychology of denial.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting take, but I guess that works, because otherwise I can't really explain that every time there is some danger in the lyrics, it is immediately brushed away.
Yeah, I get what you mean. The adjectives that you used in the intro to describe this album, I think were really good, like angular, anxious, nervous, that kind of thing. But I don't think a lot of that comes through in this track. I think the most it would come through would be in the intro, kind of the way that the intro sounds.
Yeah.
This is a really catchy song, though. It has a really good keyboard hook. And I feel like this could have been a big song. I don't really think it was. I don't think anything off this album made much of a dent anywhere. But this is one of those Tull songs that I think had every right to be a big popular song.
Well, I think it was played a lot on live shows subsequently, which must have been quite difficult.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning there was actually a music video for this song, and I tried looking it up on YouTube before we started today, and I couldn't find it for whatever reason. I don't know, it got taken down apparently. But it was part of the Slipstream compilation. Yeah. And from what I remember, a lot of it is just kind of the band in the spacesuit uniform things. There's a couple of kids in the video who they kind of have they have eyelids painted on they have eyes painted on the back of their eyelids, so they look really creepy and stuff. I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but I remember it being pretty entertaining back last time I saw it.
I may have seen it, I don't really recall it.
It was kind of the first Tull music video that really seemed like it had real effort put into it, which I guess that's kind of what the Slipstream thing was.
Yeah, the Slipstream compilation always felt kind of weird to me because it was songs from very different eras.
Yeah, I mentioned on the Too Old to Rock and Roll episode how they did a video for that song with the band from A, which always really confused me whenever I saw it. I really like the vocal effect on this song, for what it's worth. I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
And the breakdown at the end is kind of interesting, where the drums kind of go into more of like a sort of a swaggered beat with the same, lyrics and everything on top of them. But I like this one overall. It's a definite standout.
Yeah, for sure.
Track 3, Working John, Working Joe. So there's a couple of different moments on this album that, for me, they're kind of like, reminders that this is in fact a Jethro Tull album. And maybe that's kind of a meaningless statement because, of course, it wasn't meant to be a Jethro Tull album. But this song is kind of one of those moments where you have, the acoustic guitar that kind of kicks this song off. And this was also a song which was demoed as far back as Songs from the Wood, but it was sort of saved for this album. And, I can't really say that I enjoy this track that much. It's kind of catchy, but I think overall it's a bit repetitive. The chorus actually, it makes me think of Crest of a Knave, to be honest. Like, this is the kind of music that I could see being on an album like Crest of a Knave.
I know what you mean.
I don't think it would have fit at all on Songs from the Wood, so I'm glad they didn't put it on.
Oh, it absolutely didn't. I think they mentioned on Songs from the Wood that they did write this song and they recorded it without any intention of it being on the album, because it was obvious that it didn't fit, but they just recorded it for the sake of maybe making it a B-side at some point. It's interesting you mentioned the acoustic guitar kicking off the track and it being a Tull thing, but the acoustic guitar on this track is very heavily flanged or chorused or whatever modulation is on it, because an acoustic guitar with a standard Tull acoustic sound that we've grown to expect would be completely out of place. Of course, on this one. There's an alternate version of this track on the remixed album where the acoustic guitar doesn't have that effect applied. So one can compare how it fits between the two versions. There's another interesting thing when comparing. I'm kind of comparing the versions of this track a lot in my head. But on the early Songs from the Wood demo of this song, they had an extra verse, or an extra half a verse, that was cut out. But in the track notes, Ian says that they added a verse on A, which is very confusing. I think he confused the two versions or something, because that's the opposite of what happened. The version on A is like 4 lines shorter. For good, I think. It wasn't a brilliant verse that they removed.
Yeah, having the demo version from Songs from the Wood is really interesting, because it's an opportunity to see the same song played by sort of two different eras of the band, which is not something that you can really experience very often.
2 different lineups, yes. Well, we can hear a lot of songs played by many lineups on live albums, but that's different.
Yeah,
I don't have really a lot of musical observations about this one, because overall this sounds like more or less a standard Tull song.
Yeah.
A not very standout one for that, to me. But yeah, the subject matter is, of course, where we can see that Ian was writing these kinds of songs as far back as Songs from the Wood.
Yeah. And he talks a bit about the lyrical content of this song, and I mean, I don't really have much to comment on it or anything, but he sort of mentions that it's a way of looking at not just the blue-collar worker, but looking at how workers of all stations and stripes, how they're all involved in the same rat race, the same, daily labor, that kind of thing. That was kind of the point of this song. Yeah,
there's not too much of depth in these lyrics, but kind of they say what they say. It's a song about careers, and being trapped in a career. Track 4, Black Sunday.
Tomorrow is the one day I would change for a Monday, with freezing rains melting and no trains running and sad eyes passing in windows flimsy.
Here we come. I think there's a lot to talk about on this one. First off, I would actually, before I go into the musical analysis, which I have a lot of for this song, believe me, I would like to talk about the story, because the story in the lyrics is kind of ambiguous, actually. It's not entirely clear what had happened, and what is your take on that?
Well, he mentions in the booklet that this is kind of an on-the-road song, that he mentions that there's several different on-the-road songs sort of from throughout the discography, and that this is one of them. Yeah,
that much is clear. But this is not specifically a story about being on the road. It's a song about a return, and a return that doesn't feel like it should. So what do you think happened between the main character of the song and whoever they were expecting to find at home, as you said in the lines, saying how sorry, how sad was the leaving? Did their partner leave them? Did their partner leave them for good? Or what do you read in this? How do you perceive it?
So I'll actually quote directly from the booklet here. This isn't going to answer your question, I think, but this is kind of the extent of what he says about it. He just says, once in a while you get those rather self-indulgent feelings which are perhaps a bit irrelevant to most other people because they are essentially driven by rock and roll touring, if you like. But by the same token, I think a lot of the sentiments and emotions apply regardless of your occupation if you happen to have to spend time away from home and loved ones. And then he just kind of go on to mention about how he typically invents personas or fantasies when he writes songs, but that this one is very much kind of a personal song from him. And that's kind of the extent of what he says about the lyrics.
Well, yeah, it doesn't really explain a lot, because it feels to me like this is a story of a person whose world is falling apart.
Yeah.
And it has that feel to it.
It's not clear to me what Sunday has to do with the rest of the lyrics of the song, which I've always thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's something. There's clearly an idea that something had happened that the narrator, the protagonist, did not expect, and we were getting a hint that someone had left them. Maybe it was a partner, maybe it's something else, but it's clearly something irreversible has transpired. They've lost something irreplaceable. That is the kind of takeaway. And musically, okay, I'll go straight to the main musical idea, to the main melody. I have things to say about the other musical elements too, but because I think the main melody kind of contributes to that story a lot in the following way. The melody has actually a very, very narrow range, which is not really typical, probably, I think, of Ian's melodies. It's just, it has the range from E to C, it's in the key of E minor, and the melody just has these notes. So 6 notes altogether. And for the whole song, the melody tries to stay in the same place, but the way the harmony moves, the bass notes and the chords, it gets the ground kicked out from under it all of the time, because the harmony keeps sliding down. And it's sliding down in a very specific way. There's a lot of stepwise motion. And whenever it's stepwise, it almost always goes down. And only at the very end of the verse does it manage to, with some difficulty, get back up. But as it gets back up, it drags the melody line down. So together it works like this. In the bass, I will play the bass notes first, so you know what to listen for. The bass notes go like this. So you can hear that for most of the time we are descending, and when we try to get back up, we don't do it in a single motion. There is this back and forth. And together with the melody, it sounds like this. I, of course, played the bass notes slightly faster. With the melody, they will go slower, and it will sound like this. And listen for what is happening in the bass compared to the melody. So from this you can hear how the bass notes keep sliding down and the melody keeps trying to remain in the same spot, but it can't, and then it just goes down at the very end. And it, to me, sort of represents the effort of the protagonist to remain afloat emotionally and physically, kind of to keep their momentum while things are happening around them, and while they're losing whatever they are losing in the story. And all of this behavior is, of course, it's not purely the function of the notes in combination with each other. It's not every melody that is constructed like that will have this effect, but I think that together with the rhythm, the vocal delivery and the lyrics, it colors the message of the song in a tremendous way.
Yeah, this song has a lot of character. And I think, you know, it starts from the very beginning, where it's a really, you know, mysterious, kind of swirling, cloudy intro. And I really love how that sounds with all the different instruments coming in at different times and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a very specific sound at the beginning as well, because it's the Lydian mode, which is not something that's often heard in Western music. The difference, so what's going on there is this it's this, and it is a major key, but it's an extra major key. So a major key will have these notes, and this has these notes. And an interesting thing about that is normally the Lydian sound is thought about as something very bright and something quite happy, because it's kind of has an augmented note. It sounds happier than major. But in this song, it sounds ominous even.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the effect that it has. And this song has lots of other kind of ominous places.
That melody that you just played, I would actually use the word iconic when I talk about that synth line, because that synth line, it almost sounds representative of this album as a whole. And I mean, I would even maybe say like most of 80s Tull in general. Like that's kind of a good way of summing up the kind of sound that the band were going for at a lot of these times. So I think that this song, it's probably fair to say this was the song that lived the most after this album. I think it's a song that a lot of Tull fans would highlight as kind of the one standout takeaway from the album. And this song was played live for a long time afterwards. And I think Ian still does it today, maybe, I don't know. And
yeah.
I kind of like how it sounds live more. In the versions I've heard, they play it faster, which I think sounds cool. But I think this is kind of, this is the one that really had legs outside of the album.
Yeah, they even used the melody as a guitar solo tacked onto Locomotive Breath.
I never saw that.
Live versions.
That's cool.
Really? Yeah, there's a number of versions like that where Locomotive Breath segues into the guitar solo from Black Sunday without the vocals, just the instrumental. The
bridge here you have, it's very kind of like, I mean, it's very dramatic. I would call it kind of like the voice of God bridge that you have going on with the robot voice, which is all over this album, and it's actually a little bit on Broadsword too. Yeah,
there's another bridge there, which is like da-da-da-da-dum. Yeah, this one. And it also employs dissonances. Like the song itself is an E minor, and it doesn't have a lot of dissonance in it, but the intro, this Lydian vamp, is quite dissonant. And this little bridge I just played is also employing a form of dissonance, which is taking the chords that would sound right in a key and replacing them with the opposite versions of them, replacing them with minor. So we have here an E minor and a G minor and a C minor. And G minor and C minor are chords from a very different key. They don't really work with E. But what the answer to what they are doing here is this. If we played G and C as major chords, everything would sound perfectly fine. It would be just this. And it's wonderful. But when you replace one of these chords with its minor version, it gives that sudden, horror movie effect. So if you do... a shadow falls.
Yeah.
And it works very similarly with the other chord, and with both of them together, it's just like, oh no, what is happening?
Yeah, I like the ending quite a bit, where it's kind of like the main synth line just being repeated with the guitar, drums, and bass. Now that I think it sounds pretty cool as an ending.
Yeah.
But I think, to be honest, I think I probably like Fylingdale Flyer more than this one, but those are like the two standouts of this album, and I think most Tull fans would agree with that.
Yeah, well, I think I maybe prefer Black Sunday to Fylingdale Flyer. But yeah, so I'm not original in this regard. This kind of probably my favorite track on the album.
Track 5, Protect and Survive. So this is one of those tracks I don't really have a lot to say about. Kind of the main thing I would mention is that the beginning of this song, kind of the passage with the violin played by Eddie Jobson, who is sort of a famous violin player as well as keyboard player. This is another of those moments that's kind of like the reminder that this is a Tull album. It kind of has that feeling to me. But I mean, the rest of it, it's really disorienting. This track is kind of the way that I would put it, and not in a good way, I think. Just the synths sound really tinny. They sound very toy-like, which that could, maybe it's intentional, I don't know, but I think more than anything, it's probably just an example of aging, of just kind of just the way that 80s synths sound. I think that the little timbales, or whatever those are kind of interesting. I'm assuming those are actual instruments, like actual drums being played. I think this is probably too early for sampling still. I don't know. But I don't know. This is not one that I'm a fan of. It just sounds really grating, sort of is the way I would put it.
I'm not sure it sounds is that grating to me, but one of the reasons why it feels disorienting is probably, the harmony. I'm not going to analyze this one deeply because there's a lot of harmonic complexity in it between different parts, and it's kind of just complex in a proggy way. It's not narrative, but it's just using unexpected movement, just going to unexpected places tonally over the song. And it's just, I think it feels to me like an attempt to make something complex, which in that regard is quite successful.
I don't mean to keep referring back to theme parks, but just that's one of the things that I know a lot about as it happens. But this song reminds me of the kind of like really canned synthy future music you would hear in like the Tomorrowland section of Disneyland or something. That's kind of what it reminds me of, and not really in a good way, because it feels kind of inauthentic in that regard or something.
Funny you say that. I think this is another track that Stuart Wood on his YouTube channel called Satirical.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it may be, intentional for it to feel a little inauthentic. But I'm not sure. Well, when listening to the lyrics, to me, what I immediately think of is Ray Bradbury's short story There Will Come Soft Rains, because it has a very similar kind of juxtaposition of routine of daily life, day-to-day things, with apocalyptic technological doomsday imagery.
Yeah.
And in this song we have postmen and milkmen who have been disintegrated in nuclear blasts, and or similar horrible things happen to them. And in that short story, it tells about a high-tech kind of futuristic robotic household that continues its existence after the people it served have perished in a nuclear explosion. And the house kind of continues to serve food and play music and read people good night stories. Yeah,
he mentions in the booklet how the name Protect and Survive is something which came from a government pamphlet in the UK as, nuclear drill type thing, which apparently that's something that's well known in the UK. Maybe some Brits are familiar with that. But that's kind of where the topic comes from.
Yeah, for sure.
And he actually compares that to today with coronavirus. He just kind of makes a connection there.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't know. I don't have a lot more on this. It's not one I would ever choose to listen to. I think some of the sound choices are interesting, but they're not really something that's very pleasing to my ear.
Yeah, neither do I. I really kind of my interesting thought about this one was the connection to Bradbury, and I think I don't think it's incidental. There's the word about in the lyrics about rains, and there's that silhouette of a person. And all of these are images from Ray Bradbury's story. So consciously or not, I think it must have been influenced in a way. Track 6, Batteries Not Included.
6 o'clock in the morning, wake up by the bed that sits on your Japanese toy.
actually, I think this track is musically quite cool. I absolutely tune out the lyrics when listening to it, because kind of in relation to the music, these lyrics make no sense whatsoever to me. But again, it's a very interesting decision to use. I've mentioned before the use of quartal harmony in Tull's music, whether it would be for the effect of a Gregorian chant or for the effect of a jazzy feeling. And here we have a robotic feeling conveyed by the use of this chord, which is what we're hearing throughout the verse. It's just it's this, and it's a stack of fourths. It's one, or we could play it like that, which is probably closer to what they are using there. And it is used to convey a kind of technological, a kind of robotic feeling of something that is not quite human, which is a very interesting use of that.
It's a really high energy track, and I think it's really amping up kind of the paranoid energy that you mentioned before.
Yeah.
And honestly, for me, this is kind of another one where I just find the synth sounds just kind of annoying, to be frank. It's I don't know, like, it's really high energy, like they're really trying for something, but it just the sounds just don't mesh well with me. It just sounds like, you know, a little buzz in my ear that I want to get rid of. It doesn't really sound like something I want to listen to.
I think the energy in it is what, you know, what kind of brings me around.
Yeah.
And it's, in that regard, it's quite a good track, but it just doesn't connect to me with the lyrics in it. It does have that high energy and paranoid feeling, and the story is about a kid's tragedy whose toy doesn't have batteries in it. I mean, whether that's satire or not, I don't think it's successful.
So he mentions in the booklet, I'm just mentioning all these things from the booklet just because I happen to have it here with me, but he mentions how the idea behind this was, you know, buying children toys for Christmas, but the parents don't realize that there's not batteries included. So it's kind of the tragedy of a child who gets a brand new toy, but then they can't use it because their parents were dumb enough not to buy batteries. But I think he also kind of tries to draw comparisons with, like, you know, a nightmarish vision of like evil robots who, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's either one or the other.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think it meshes together thematically. And, you know, a kid's disappointment at a toy without batteries is an absolutely valid subject for a song, I think. But I feel like the song musically is trying to do something different. And in combination with the lyrics, it kind of sounds, and it's a word I will use very rarely in relation to Ian's lyrics, inane.
Yeah. I mean, one comparison I can kind of make with this one musically is, I will spoil this a little bit, in that I would just say for now that I don't hate Under Wraps, the album. I will speak more on that later. But one of the reasons that I don't hate Under Wraps is I quite admire how high energy that album is, because it's really very energetic. And I mean, this track is energetic too, but it doesn't, you know, it doesn't carry over for me. Just, you know, just because this one is high energy doesn't mean I like it. It's just one thing I'll mention.
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be uncomfortable. I think this sound was selected specifically to kind of, probably before the concept existed, I'm not sure, give that uncanny valley maybe experience. So it's not supposed to sound pleasant. I just don't know why they kind of try to combine this with the subject matter.
So one thing worth mentioning, the kid who speaks on the bridge is James Anderson, Ian Anderson's son, who, I mean, I don't know a lot about him, but I do know that for a period that he's a drummer actually, and he played drums with Tull a couple times when Don Perry couldn't make it. He was kind of a frequent substitute drummer for Tull, which I'll just mention that, I mean, it's really impressive for anybody to be able to do that. So especially for him as Ian's son, to be able to step in and play a Tull set on drums is kind of cool, I think.
Yeah. Well, Is this his first, appearance on the record?
Probably. Ian actually mentions that in the booklet. He says that he doesn't have any memory of recording him, so he doesn't really know how it went, but he assumes that he coaxed him into saying it somehow. So, Track 7, Uniform.
Uniforms. Uniforms. See golden haloed men.
So, I hate to say again, there's not a lot that I have on this one, but I can say that the overriding sense I get from this one is there's a very clear sense of apprehension in the way that this song sounds, kind of driven by that primary violin part, which is very brooding and kind of afraid.
Yeah, it does, and I think the violin is of course the standout element of this track, but to me, this song again, it doesn't really come together, and it's a shame because it has some very, very cool elements. For one, it's got that little Phrygian mode, Eastern kind of feel, something that the Tull would only do a lot on Roots to Branches as late as. But it's like the verses, the music in this one, it feels like it's been bodged together from different songs. Because first of all, you've got this wonderful riff on the violin that goes. And this is not a mistake I made. The violin actually plays this minor second at the top, which is a fantastic use of dissonance, and it sounds really well in context. But then what they do is that they have this Phrygian idea that the melody begins with. Sounds wonderful, sounds great. And then they remove the Phrygian mode and play a standard minor line, which isn't bad in and of itself. It's okay because it gives you the contrast between Phrygian and minor. Good choice. But what is not a good choice is that this line is painfully similar. They say protect and you survive. To a melody from a couple songs before, from Protect and Survive, and it goes on to a phrase very similar to Protect and Survive, and it's kind of a shame, and the bridge is just kind of boring.
Yeah, the only other thing I really have to say on it, at the end there's kind of a drum solo, which is kind of interesting, just because you don't see a lot of those in Tull, especially later Tull. So that was something that stuck out to me. It's not quite a solo, but just kind of trading fills. But I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. No, the ending with the flutes trading with the drums is kind of cool because it goes back into that Phrygian situation, and it's got a lot of tension and a lot of interesting things musically. And, again, thematically, I'm not sure what is the point of this song. Is it a song about that people dress similarly, that cricket players wear a uniform, that the way that people dress carries meaning? It does, yeah, but is the fact that every time that meaning is discernible, does it make an outfit a uniform? What is the point that Ian is trying to make here? Is this an I am so smart moment from him?
Yeah,
looking at a crowd.
I think you're actually hitting the nail on the head, because what he says in the booklet is, this is a quote, "Uniform is a song about uniforms." That's a direct quote. But uniforms in the broadest sense, so anything from the obligatory t-shirt and jeans of youth to people who adorn their person with their cultural or religious roots. That's about it.
Yeah, okay. So what I'm saying to that? Because I kind of have an issue with that, because the calling that a uniform has a sense of being critical, right? And the way it's delivered in the lyrics, the way that it's the repeated kind of refrain, it's all uniform, and kind of, so what?
I guess maybe it's worth drawing a line between the sentiments expressed in this song and the actual uniforms that the band wore. in promoting and touring this album, which I think Ian has said in retrospect he thinks was a mistake, which I'm glad he says that, because I do think it looks pretty ridiculous, but what do I know?
That's true. That is true. I wonder if when performing the song live, he just gestured around himself, pointing at all at the band and saying, "It's all uniform."
Yeah, that would be one of those things where, I mean, hypothetically, if I was in Jethro Tull in 1980, I would think that, okay, this is ridiculous. We're all going to dress up like, we're in Star Trek or something.
Track 8, 4-wheel drive, low ratio. I think in this one, the groove is actually pretty cool. This is my take on this. It's a very groovy song, and I like the kind of the bluesy / folk flow of the melody. It's like a folk tune that uses a blues scale, and blues or just pentatonic, but it kind of, I like how it flows without interruption, like without pause, and it gives it an extra groovy feel. But that is until you look at the lyrics, because again, last time today, I'm using this word, inane.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you thought about the little low robot, the low ratio.
Oh, that's annoying.
So one of my first notes I had on this one, so the drum intro and the outro too, kind of. You could almost think that it's like Mark Craney trying to do a take on No Lullaby. Like, you could almost think it's I mean I don't know if that was the point, but you could almost, as a Tull fan, you could think that that's what he's trying to go for, which is kind of cute, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's more kind of jazzy, bluesy piano. I agree. I mean, I enjoy the drums on this song. I think they're kind of cool. Yeah,
I think the drums are, and the intro and outro are some of the best parts of this song. And here's a surprising fact. I actually dig the drums in the 2004 remaster more than the Steven Wilson remix, because Steven restored kind of the natural sound of the drum, but he also removed some of the impact from the groove. I think it's the low end in the kick in particular, and it just lacks a little bit of oomph, in the last version. And he also, this is one of the changes that I noticed, he also, in the transition into the outro, where the drums just remain on their own, there used to be a little delay on the kick. It just went, and it doesn't do that anymore. He removed that.
Is that the thing, the one thing you noticed that they removed?
Yes, yes. And I think just because he removed the effects from the drums, he removed that as well. But I'm not sure that was the removal of that was necessary.
This is kind of an aside, but just as we're talking about the remix, I remember in the booklet, Steven Wilson has his little, paragraph or two of notes on the remix, and he mentions that doing this one was very standard, except there was like one effect that he gave up on Fylingdale Flyer just because he couldn't recreate it with modern stuff, and I don't know what it was, but he mentions that.
That's interesting, but he doesn't say what.
Not that I remember.
Cryptic Wilson. Yeah, but I mean, besides the verse, one of the things where this song kind of falls down for me is that other than the verse, it lacks excitement, because the bridges are just, I struggle to remember them every time, what they sound like. But the lyrics, it's, I don't know, it's Ian trying to be cool, maybe a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's like, look, I'm singing about a cool car and being cool in that car. Isn't that cool? Result, extremely uncool. And maybe that was the intention. Maybe that was kind of the late Phil Collins sort of thing. Let's be uncool together. But
in the booklet, he actually mentions that the reason the title is what it is because he wanted to avoid confusion with the Bachman-Turner Overdrive song 4-Wheel Drive, which is why it's shortened to 4WD with low ratio in it. And he also mentions actually that they tried recording this in 1978 in June.
Oh wow!
But it didn't get further than, he says, an untitled backing track with no vocals. And someone could correct me on this, but I'm pretty certain that if it was June 1978, that was after Heavy Horses was finished already. So that would have been around a little before Stormwatch. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, musically, it's not a new idea for Tull. If you strip this down, I mean, try and imagine this melody and this track played like on a mandolin with some bongos and an acoustic guitar, and you've got a contender for stand-up.
Yeah.
But so it's not something that could have only happened on A.
One thing that this song makes me realize, not just about this song, but kind of the album in general, maybe you can help me out with this, but the bass has a really distinctive tone on this whole album. And it almost sounds kind of bent in a way. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. It could be the use of a fretless bass. I'm not sure if Dave did that. But sometimes I didn't examine that closely because on a lot of this album, the bass is doubled with a synth bass.
Yeah.
Or replaced. And so there's not a consistent bass sound throughout the album. But sometimes sounds like that come from a fretless bass or from a bass with a piezo pickup. But I'm not sure. I'm completely not sure that it is the case here.
And the only other thing I have on this song, just sort of musically, is that the drums on this song make me realize, again, not just this song, but the whole album, there's quite a lot of China cymbal on this album. So I think Mark liked that quite a bit.
Yeah, sure. There's another thing that's not a very interesting point, is that the transition from intro to verse, it feels familiar to me. But I couldn't find what other song it reminds me of. Maybe someone can think of it. It's just this melody line kind of feels familiar. Da da dum, da da dum. I kind of expect them to go into a different song at that point.
Yeah, I know that feeling. Not about this song particularly, but it's always crazy when you get that feeling of it reminds you so much of another song, but it's hard to place what it is.
Yeah.
Track 9, the Pine Marten's Jig. So this is probably the most Tull track on this album, I guess you could say. And it's interesting, in the booklet, Ian mentions that he sort of wrote this song for Dave Pegg. Because Dave Pegg, as I know many Tull fans probably know, is kind of a preeminent folk rocker in in the UK, and of course he is kind of a legend with Fairport Convention, which was his main band, I mean forever basically. And that Ian sort of wrote this for Dave Pegg in order to make him feel more comfortable, sort of, just because that is Dave's wheelhouse and sort of the folk realm. So that's sort of interesting in that regard.
I think I prefer this track performed live very much to the album version, because the album version, well, this is one I have already criticized a number of songs here, but this is another one I'm going to criticize because I really can't tell what this track is trying to do. You know, it combines so many things that don't really gel together. Like there's a fast house guitar, which is cool on its own, and a funky bass and a mandolin, and these elements just, to me, don't combine. You can do things like that, right? You can take very disparate elements and feels and make of them a new creature. But instead of some kind of majestic, terror-inducing sphinx, this is something with a chicken foot for a head, and that spends the 3 minutes of its life wriggling in a lab jar.
Yeah. I was going to mention the guitar, because the guitar tone during the solo is really searing, which is not something that you really see much on a lot of other Tull things.
And played live with fewer synth sounds and fewer mandolin, that it just contributes an acoustic tone that comes out of nowhere. When it's just guitar, bass, drums, and a little bit of keyboards, it works much better because it's delivered in a shared sonic space. While here, that there is none of that. There's
also slap bass on this track, which off the top of my head, I can't think of any other Tull song that has that.
Yeah, that's slap bass and synth bass and all sorts of things.
The only other thing I have to mention on this song is it actually, musically, it reminds me a lot of the Third Hurrah from War Child. Kind of the main part of it, it sounds kind of similar.
Yeah, but I don't know, the Third Hurrah sounds musically more interesting, while here it's just, a very standard jig with extra beats.
Yeah.
Which is one other criticism I have of this. This is not a very exciting melody. It's pretty much, run-of-the-mill Celtic folk tune.
Yeah.
Made slightly more complex by adding extra beats and stops.
This is actually one track I would pick, I suppose, as one that I don't mind as much. I can listen to this. I wouldn't probably choose to, but I don't. I think it's decently enjoyable. But I mean, as far as folk Tull songs go, instrumental Tull songs, it definitely doesn't come to the forefront, I think.
Yeah, it's you can put it on the background, and it'll be fine, but you don't really notice it happening.
Yeah.
And when I look at it closely, it kind of falls apart for me. Track 10 and Further On.
Wish you goodbye, still further on.
This is a very surprising track for me on the album. First off, we've got the reverse reverb from Dark Ages.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
Same kind of vocal effect. And to me, this song is like a beautiful ending to a story that never happened. This is like the ending for a different album.
Yeah.
Because we've spent the album, I don't know, cowering under fire, driving through an apocalyptic landscape, scraping for batteries, and gallivanting in a jeep through the mud. And suddenly, all of a sudden, we're getting a farewell, like we've been on a beautiful journey. And it doesn't connect to the rest of the album for me, which is a shame, because I really like this song, actually.
Yeah, it's first off, I'll say the beginning of this track, it's kind of the closest that Tull get to like flat out electronica in kind of some of their discography, just the first 30 seconds or so. So the reverse reverb you mentioned Dark Ages. I actually thought of Dunringill, that the voice sounds very Dunringilly, that's a cool adjective to use, Dunringilly. So maybe we should use
Yes.
that more. In terms of the content of it, I'll refer to the book again. I probably sound very nerdy this episode, but Ian mentions that this is a dying Earth song. So, I mean, to me, it makes me think of the dramatics of this song make me think of like Michael Jackson's Earth song or something. But I guess if you want to connect it to the rest of the material on the album, maybe you can say it's the death of the world from nuclear catastrophe or whatever you want to put it.
Well, yeah, but there's not a lot of that actually happening on the album. There is a lot of anxiety, there is a lot of foreboding, but all of a sudden the epic images on this song just come out of nowhere.
Really massive drum sound, kind of like you mentioned Dark Ages, kind of a similar huge drum sound to that.
Yeah, and it's kind of another adjective. It does have a little bit of broadswordy feel already.
Yeah, I can see that.
Wouldn't be out of place there, but it's just a very odd combination for me. The entire album with this ending, and it works very well as an ending because it's a very final song. It's a very farewell sort of thing. It's just I can't imagine why they wanted to use it, but really it's like an epilogue from a different story.
Yeah, I can see that. The only kind of, I guess, the final word I'll give on it, he mentions in the booklet about how, a common theme in a lot of Tull material is that death is not the end, that you continue on into something more eternal, and that's kind of part of where the whole Further On thing comes from. So in a way, it kind of, it made me think of Passion Play a bit, in a way, because it kind of ties back to that same theme.
No, out of context of the album, this is a song I'll struggle to find faults with. It's not terribly exciting. It's rather on the epic side of things. Yeah. Right? Slow-moving sort of reflection. But it also almost feels like a postscript to Stormwatch rather than the beginning of a new era.
Yeah, I could see that, I suppose. So listening to all of these albums chronologically like this is a pretty interesting experience. It kind of allows you to put things more in perspective. And just kind of as an aside, for many years I had been wanting to listen to the entire Tull discography kind of from front to back chronologically, but I had actually been thinking about doing it in one sitting. So, maybe taking a weekend or something and maybe even live streaming it and trying to see if any other Tull fans would want to pop in and talk a little bit while it's going on. But anyway, one of the things that doing this chronological listen has made me realize is that up to this point, when I listened to A, I can say without a doubt that this was my least favorite album that we've heard so far. What do you think?
Maybe not my least favorite album for me. And it's not to say that there are albums I hate a lot out of the ones we've listened to. But yeah, it's bottom line for me. I'm those who've listened since the beginning know I'm not a massive fan of This Was.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably same level. Mm-hmm. For me, and which is funny because on the CD that we used to have, the bootleg thing released in early 2000s that had 2 albums per disc, it was exactly the pairing that they selected, probably just because of running time. This Was and A on the same disc.
Yeah,
very odd, but also kind of fitting because 2 beginnings.
Right. Yeah, I think the whole solo album thing just gives me a really weird feeling about this album from the very beginning. And, like I said at the beginning, if it was, it started as one thing and it morphed into something else, I could understand that. But the fact that, this entire album, according to what we know, was completely recorded, mixed and mastered with the intention of being an Ian solo album, and then it was only changed at the last minute because of label pressure. That just puts a really weird taste in my mouth about this album and how we're supposed to judge it, So
that's true, because when you create something, there's an intention, there's something there while you're doing it as something. And suddenly calling it a different thing that you didn't intend to is just contrary to, the creative process.
Yeah. And it's worth mentioning that an Ian Anderson solo album was, fairly well anticipated, I think, at this point. Mm-hmm. It was something that, Ian was talking about at least internally with people in Tull for a long time, at least as far back as Stormwatch, that he was going to do a solo thing. And that being said, I still think that even as an Ian Anderson solo album, it's kind of a weird album in that respect. But, that being said, the first actual Ian Anderson solo album, Walk Into Light, is also an extremely weird album, to be an Ian Anderson solo album.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so an Ian Anderson solo album would have been weird no matter what.
Yeah. I think people would have been surprised that it's so electronic. Mm-hmm. And again, like the real Ian solo album debut is even more electronic than this one. So
yeah, I wonder if that critic who called out Stormwatch for being out of date musically was satisfied with A.
Yeah. So do you have favorite and least favorite tracks you could pick out from this one?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty obvious from the discussion what they are. My main favorite is Black Sunday because catchphrase, you don't argue with the Goosebumps. And my other favorite is Fylingdale Flyer. Mm-hmm. And my least favorite, I will not put Uniform as my least favorite because there are elements in it that I like very much. I'm just disappointed that they don't really work together. So least favorites, I will say probably Workin' John, Workin' Joe and The Pine Martin's Jig, because these are the 2 songs that just don't do anything at all for me.
Yeah. I think for me, the 2 standouts for sure for me are Fylingdale Flyer and Black Sunday. And if I had to pick a third one, I'd pick Crossfire because I think that one's not bad.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Least favorite, I don't know. I don't really feel strongly in like singling out certain ones to, point at, but if I had to, I would pick Protect and Survive and Batteries Not Included as the 2 that I really don't enjoy listening to. Mm-hmm. We kind of talked about this before we started recording, but there's a big side gap for me on this album where I think the first side is, not that bad. I think there's really some decent material in the first 4 tracks, but the second side just really does nothing for me. It kind of all runs together. Nothing really sticks out to me. It's really not a series of tracks that I'm really have any interest in hearing.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's probably, to me, the second side is always, this track is nice, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a lot of buts in there, even with And Further On, which I like, but not in this context.
Right. And so this kind of ends, a very quick, interesting one-off era in the band, because even at this stage, it's not that common in Tull to have a lineup that only lasts for one album. And maybe it's not fair to say that because of course 3/5 of that lineup continued on, but Eddie Jobson and Mark Craney were gone after this, pretty much not to be seen again, although Eddie Jobson, I think, played 1 or 2 shows with Tull still later on. So it's kind of interesting just in that regard, just to think of, this was one very specific year in the band's history that kind of was never replicated again. It's just kind of this one album.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, as always. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you guys in 2 weeks with The Broadsword and the Beast.
See you. Cheers.